Hello everyone, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Today on the show, I'm going to show you how to make these beautiful fan-stitch lacy gloves. Why? Why am I making fan-stitch lacy gloves and why am I all dressed up like this? Well, a friend of mine is getting married at the end of the month and I've been very busy this month making all of her bridal party gloves and bridal party wraps. She's in lovely wraps in white and black for her and the girls. And I thought while I was making these, I would show you guys how to make them along with me. And as an added bonus, there's a pattern for free up on our website at jaydainstitches.com. This is great if you're still trying to figure out how to read a pattern. You can flip over to our website, download the pattern, come on back, and then you can follow along while you make the tutorial with me. Of course, I've made myself a pair in black because these are perfect for date night. And black goes with a lot of things. But you can make them in any color that you like. And of course, the bride will be in a lovely champagne, and I have made her a pair of those in lovely champagne, with a little satin bow, of course. These also are really nice in white, and like I said, any other color. In fact, any baby yarn you can get your hands on makes a lovely pair of lacy fan-stitch gloves. So, without further ado, let's grab our patterns and come on over to the craft table with me, and I will show you how to make yourself a lovely pair of these beautiful bridal fan-stitch gloves. In order to make our lacy fan-stitch fingerless gloves, we're going to use a nice, soft, fingering weight or baby weight yarn. This is 3-ply in acrylic, so it'll wash well, and it's thinner than the kind of yarn we normally use. It's also considered a size 3 on the yarn scale, so something thin like this and nice and soft. You're going to need a yarn needle, a pair of scissors, and a 5.5 millimeter hook, or an I9. This is also going to contribute to the nice open lacy look of our stitches. And if you're still learning how to follow a pattern, I recommend downloading the free copy of this pattern from our website and have it with you so you can follow along as we make the gloves, and this will give you an idea of how to read patterns. And once you've got all those things in front of you, we can get started. Our fingerless glove is fully reversible. So there's that thumb hole that you're going to need, and you're going to make the exact same mitten twice because it doesn't matter which hand it sits on, it's the same on one side and the other. It's another reason I absolutely adore this little pattern I put together. You only have to worry about making the pattern one way. You don't have to stop and reverse or change in order to put in a left and a right thumb. So it's a fully reversible mitt, and you only have to make the pattern the same way twice. We're going to begin with a slip knot. You want to place that knot on your hook and make sure it's not too tight or too loose and it moves around comfortably on your hook. Very important to keep in mind for this pattern is our gauge, our stitch gauge, or how tightly or loosely you crochet. You want to be light with your stitches, so you want to be a little on the looser side. You don't want everything to be tight. So while you're crocheting, you want to make sure that you're not pulling too tightly on your yarn, because we're making lace here. We're not making an amigurumi. You're going to begin chaining like I am now, and you're going to chain 24 to start. That's for an average lady's size glove. If you're making them for a larger hand, you can chain 32 and the rest of the pattern stays the same. But if you're making a pair that would fit a pair of hands like mine, I'd say those are fairly average hands, chain 24. Once you've chained 24, we're going to make a circle out of the whole thing. So try not to twist your chained row. You want to make sure it's all nice and flat. Take your hook and pass it through that first chain and slip stitch. So wrap and pull back through everything because you're making yourself a big circle. We're going to work the individual chains in this row. So we're going to begin by chaining 4. So now we're working on row 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. This chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. So the first 3 chains is a double crochet, and the 4th chain is literally a chain 1. Into that same sort of stitch that we joined in, so that same chain that's a little open there, you're going to double crochet, and the first row is always a little bit odd, a little tricky, so remember to be patient. We're going to skip 3 chains, so I'm just going to ignore my little tail, and you can ignore yours too. You're going to skip 3 chains. So let's look closely here. This is the first chain that we worked. Here's the next one, the second one, and the third one. So we're going to skip these 3, identify the 4th, and we're going to double crochet 5 times into that chain. And the 5 double crochets together are a fan. There's 2, and 3, and 4, 1 more, and 5. So that's 5 double crochets into that same chain. That makes a fan. You're going to skip the next 3 stitches, or the next 3 chains, and chains are stitches, so if you hear me interchanging those 2 words, it basically means the same thing. So there's 1, 2, 3. Here's the next one, and we're going to do our work into that, and we're making a V now. So we're going to double crochet into that chain, chain 1, and double crochet back into the same chain, or stitch. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into the same stitch is a V, and 5 double crochets into the same stitch is a fan. And that is the pattern. V, fan, V, fan. What do we do next? We skip 3 chains. So there's 1, 2, 3. Identify the next one, and we fan into it. So that's 5 double crochets into that same stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Lovely. And we repeat. Skip the next 3 chains, identify the next one, and it's a V this time. So we double crochet into that next stitch, or the 4th chain along there, chain 1, and double crochet back into the same chain. That gives us our V. Still repeating, we're going to skip the next 3 chains and fan into the 4th. And a fan is 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if we skip the next 3, 1, 2, 3, that brings us back to that first V that we made. So we know we're all the way back around to the beginning of row 1. So now we need to complete the row, count the first 3 chains that you made to begin that row. So you know, remember we chained 4, and that first 3 chain counts as a double crochet. You're going to identify the 3rd one, which is in this case the top of our pretend double crochet, slip your hook through it, and slip stitch, and that joins our row, and that completes row 1. Oh, look how pretty and lightweight and lacy that is. It is just so lovely. And now for row 2. So as you know, if you've done the fan stitch pattern with me before, this pattern alternates row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2. So there's 2 rows, or sort of a on-off concept to this pattern, and this is the other side of it. It's essentially the same thing, you just have to start, whereas in row 1 we started with a V, now we start with a fan. And how do we do that properly? Well, we want to slip stitch into the space. So you see the space that's in between the two V parts. It's caused by that chain one. You're going to put your hook right through that space, slip stitch, and that starts us in the middle of the V. Now we can chain 3. This chain 3 counts as a double crochet, and in order to finish the fan we need to double crochet 4 more times. So the chain 3 counts as a double crochet plus 4 double crochets, and that's a fan of 5 double crochets. There's my third and my last. So there's my first fan. Chain 3 counts, 4 more double crochets, that's a fan. Now you can count 3, or, so there's 1, 2, 3, or you can just eyeball it and look for the middle stitch of the fan. So you see how there's 5 double crochets in that fan? You pick the middle one and you work into the top of it. And because we've already fanned, the next part of the pattern is a V. So we're going to double crochet into the top middle of that fan, chain 1, and double crochet into that same stitch. There we go. And now the pattern is pretty clear and easy. The next thing we need to do is make a fan. The fan has to go into the center of a V, so here's the next V. And we're going to double crochet right into that space. And we're going to double crochet 5 times into that space. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. After a fan comes a V. The V needs to sit in the very middle of that previous fan, so you find the middle stitch and double crochet right into the top of it. Chain 1 and double crochet into the same stitch, and that gives us our V. Same thing. Next comes a fan. Fan goes in the middle of the V. After the fan comes another V, and then we're going to slip stitch to the top of our chain 3 to finish that row, and I'll see you at the end of this row. Alright, we're finishing row 2. I've completed my last V. Here's the chain 3 that I began row 2 with. I'm going to identify the very top of it and slip my hook through it and slip stitch to join, and that completes row 2. Now if you look at the pattern, row 3 has us a beginning with a V, because every odd row, or every row 1 starts with a V, every row 2 starts with a fan. So if you started with a fan in the previous row, you know you have to start with a V. But because V's sit in the middle of a fan, we have to get from here to here. And we're going to do that by slip stitching. So we've already joined our row in the top of that chain 3, which counts as a double crochet. So we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch, or the top of the next double crochet, and then slip stitch into the top of the very middle double crochet. And that brings us to the middle of our fan. Now we can chain 3 for the double crochet, chain 1 more for that middle spacer stitch, and double crochet into that same middle stitch where we last slip stitched into. There's our V. It's sitting right on top of the middle of our fan. Next thing we have to do is create a fan. Fans go into the middle of V's. So you just need to double crochet 5 times into the middle of that V. And then you just complete the pattern all the way around again. V, fan, V, fan. When you get to the end of the row, slip stitch to the 3rd chain up, so the 3rd in your chain 3, and then we'll work on row 4 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've just completed row 3 by slip stitching to the top of that chain 3, so not the top of the entire chain length, because you want to leave that 4th chain as your spacer stitch. And that completes row 3. Row 4, we're just repeating more of the same, but we need to start with a fan. So we slip stitch into the very center of that V, so that we start in the middle, chain 3, that chain 3 counts as a double crochet, complete the rest of the fan by double crocheting 4 more times into that same space in the V. There's 2, 3 and 4, and that completes my fan. So my chain 3, 4 more double crochets, there's my fan, and now we continue. The V goes into the top of the previous fan, so the top middle stitch gets a fan, or I should say gets a V. After we finish a V, we need to make another fan. Fans go into the centers of V's. That's 5 double crochet, and so on. When you get to the end of row 4, slip stitch to the top of the chain 3 that you began the row with, and we'll be moving on. Okay, I'm going to bring the other glove in here for a minute as we move into row 5 so that I can show you where we're at. So we've started down here at the bottom of the cuff, and our first 4 rows are the rows that sit here on your wrist. The 5th row, this pretty little solid row through here, is an increase row, and that's what we're going to do right now. So we've finished row 4, we've joined with a slip stitch to the top of that chain 3. Now we don't need to move to the top of our fan because we're doing something completely different now. So you're going to chain 3 right where you are. There's 3. And into that same stitch, so you see that same stitch you've chained out of, you're going to double crochet into it. And here's the tricky part. We want to make sure we double crochet into every single stitch around. So this next stitch will look a little funny because you joined the top of your chain 3. The next stitch is a bit oddly pulled, so you're going to see something that maybe looks a bit like this. You want to make sure that you actually use this stitch and not skip over it. So you're just going to double crochet into the top of that stitch. So it might be a bit pulled. Make sure you work it because you don't want to miss it. And you're going to double crochet into the next stitch. And all your regular stitches from here on out will look like regular stitches. Okay. Into the next stitch, we're going to double crochet 2 times. So 2 double crochet into the next stitch, so this one right here. So we're 2 double crochet into that stitch, and then double crochet once into each of the next 2. So 1 double crochet here, and 1 double crochet here. You're going to make sure that you use the chain in between your V's. So the chain is a stitch. It counts as a stitch, and you have to make sure you use it. If you have trouble sort of splitting it or using the actual stitch, you can use the space, but it's better if you try and use the stitch. It just makes everything look a little neater all the way around. This is the next stitch we're working. It's a chain, and we're going to work 2 double crochets into it. So make sure you use that chain because it is a stitch and it counts, and you need to make sure you use it so that your increase row will work out properly. So 2 double crochet into that stitch. Then 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. So there's a double crochet stitch for that one and a double crochet stitch for this one. We're going to work 2 double crochet into the next stitch. 1 and 2, and a double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So 1 double crochet per each of the next 2 stitches. And that's the increase pattern. So it's 2 double crochet into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and double crochet into each of the next 2. So it's just 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So there's 1 and another 1. Now that's a chain, so make sure you use it. Even if it's a little tricky, you'll thank yourself for it later because it'll just look a lot neater. 2 double crochet into the next stitch, and 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. There's 1 and 1. So that's the pattern. You can finish off the little row here, what's left of it, doing 2 double crochet and then 1, 1. 2 double crochet, and then 1, 1. And when you get to the end of row 5, you're going to join with a slip stitch to the top of the chain 3 you began the row with. So I'm at the end of row 5. I'm going to identify that chain 3 that I started my 5th row with, and here, slip my hook to the top of it and slip stitch to join. There's row 5 all completed. It's starting to look really, really pretty. And that is the row we just finished. So now we've increased our stitch count by 8 more stitches. So if you started with 24, you should have 32. If you started with 32, you should now have 40. And now we're going to continue with the pattern. So we're going to recreate the fan stitch pattern going upwards. And we do that in this manner. Row 6, chain 4 to start. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's kind of like we're doing row 1 all over again. So the chain 3 counts as a double crochet plus your chain stitch for the middle of your V. Double crochet into that same stitch that you started from. All right. Then you skip 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. Into the 4th stitch, fan. So that's 5 double crochet into that stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Skip 3 stitches, identify the next stitch, and V. So that's double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet all into the same stitch. Skip 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3, identify the next, and fan. And that's row 6. So you can continue this fan stitch pattern, get to the end of row 6, join with a slip stitch to the top of the chain 3, and we'll start row 7. Okay, I've joined row 6 to the 3rd chain up. So remember, don't use the 4th because that's your spacer chain for your first V. So just grab the 3rd one. And that completes your 6th row. 7th row. So row 7 is the thumb hole row. And like I said before, this is a fully reversible fingerless glove. So you can make 2 absolutely identical. It's the same way for your 2nd glove. So it doesn't matter if you're on your left hand or your right hand. And this is the row we're on. This is the row we're going to create this thumb hole. Here we go. We need to start with a fan because our previous row started with a V. So we need to slip stitch into the middle of the V. And we chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Finish that fan into that V by adding 4 more double crochets. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Next is a V into the top of this fan from the previous row. So you pick that middle stitch, double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet into the same stitch. We're going to fan into the next V stitch. So here we are right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but the wind is blowing something fierce out there. We're in the middle of a bit of a storm. So if you're hearing creaking, don't worry, the house isn't coming down around me. It's just a storm outside. Okay, we started with a fan, we put in a V, we did another fan, and now we're going to create our thumb hole. We need to chain 3. So here's where the pattern gets a little wonky. 1, 2, 3. We're going to skip over where we would normally put a V and work a fan into the next V-stitch. So you've completed a fan, chain 3, and you're going to work directly into the next V-stitch by putting in a fan. So you're skipping a V-stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, one more, there's 5. Alright, so it should look something like this. There's your fan, your chain 3, and your fan. So you've created a thumb hole. You've got a nice little bottom to it and a nice little top. And the rest of the row is the regular pattern. So you V-stitch into the top of the next fan from the previous row. And then you fan into the next V from the previous row. And likewise all the way around to complete your thumb hole row. When you get to the end, slip stitch into the top of the chain 3, and we'll move on to row 8. Alright, row 8. In your pattern, if you're following along with me, it says repeat row 3. In fact, this comes up quite often because technically the V-stitch or the fan stitch pattern that we're doing here repeats, just sort of a 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 kind of concept. For the most construction, or the largest construction of the glove, you are just repeating that fan stitch. There's just that one little odd row of the increase and the one little odd row where we create our thumb hole. Here it is. But now the regular pattern continues. So we've finished by slip stitching to the top of that chain 3, which means we started with a fan in the last row. So we have to start with a V-stitch for this row. And in order to get to the middle of that fan, we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch and the stitch after that. That brings us to the top of the V, I should say the top of the fan. So we can create a V. We chain 4 and double crochet into that same stitch. Fan into the next V space. So that's 5 double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. V-stitch into the top of the next fan. 1 double crochet, chain 1, 1 double crochet, all into the same stitch. And then we need to fan. Because we skipped the V in the previous row and we put in a chain 3 in its place, we need to find the middle chain. So you look at your chain 3 from the previous row, find the middle, or whatever looks like the middle, that's probably it there, and fan into it. So carefully grab that chain and then work 5 double crochets all into that same little chain. And that puts you back on track. That makes your fan stitch pattern sort of look like the fan stitch pattern again. And the rest of this row is just the fan stitch pattern repeating. Make sure you join with a slip stitch to the top of the chain 3 at the end of this row, and then we'll move on to row 9. That's the end of row 8. Row 9 is just the regular old pattern. So we slip stitch into the V to start, because we want to start with a fan. This row ended or began with a fan, so this row has to begin, I should say this row started with a V, so the next row has to start with a fan. So we chain 3 to start and put 4 more double crochets into that V stitch, and that gives us our fan. And you know the rest from here, so you guys can do row 9 on your own. That's row 9. Row 10 is just repeating row 2, and that means we need to get to the middle of our fan. So we're going to slip stitch across the next 2, and that will bring us to the middle of our fan. And this row has to start with a V. So we chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and double crochet into the same stitch. And the same pattern continues. So the next thing is a fan, and it's the same pattern all the way around for row 10. When you're finished row 10, slip stitch to the top of the chain 3 to join, and then we'll put on row 11, which is the finishing top row to our fancy fingerless gloves. That is row 10 completed. So I joined with a slip stitch to the third chain up, left my fourth chain for that spacer bit for my V, and now we're going to complete the top with a row of single crochet. Why a row of single crochet? Well, this is a very lacy stitch, and it's a delicate little glove, so you want to put a little bit of strength at the top and the bottom. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put a single crochet row around the bottom, and that's just going to give us a little more strength. So for example, when you're pulling the mitt on, you want to make sure that you've got something that you can kind of grab and tug. There you go. And at the top, while your fingers are busy and you're typing or you're texting, you're not going to stretch that last row of the fan stitch out of whack. So you want that little bit of extra strength that a row of single crochet brings, and it just neatly finishes off the top and the bottom of our pretty little fan stitch gloves. So let's go ahead and do that. You want to make sure you keep the same stitch count. So even though you've been double crocheting and chain running all the way around, you should still have 32 if you're making the gloves that fit a medium hand, or 40 if you're making the gloves that fit a larger hand. So you're going to chain 1 to start this row, and you're going to single crochet into the same stitch that you joined in. Then, this is a little difficult to see, but the next stitch is technically this fourth thing here. You can skip this and work directly into the top of the next stitch if you like. But just remember to do the same thing on your second mitts. It's not going to change the shape of it too much, and since it's sort of awkward, it's the only time you can sort of skip that stitch. So you'll end up with, say, 31 or 39 stitches all the way around. If you want to work it or use the center space instead, you're more than welcome to if you're afraid that it might wind up being a little on the narrow side. But every other stitch has to be worked into. So you're going to single crochet into every single stitch around. When we did the 5th row, so the increase row where we were working all double crochets, you will have encountered the same sort of situation. So for example, when you get up here and we get to our V, you want to make sure that you work that chain stitch as neatly as you can, because it creates this sort of balanced look all the way around. And it's probably better that I show you here. See, instead of working the whole space, I've worked the chain, and it keeps a consistency in that single crochet row. It looks like all of the stitches match up across the bottom. And it's a small detail, but if you're making this for someone's wedding, it's the small details, as any bride will tell you, that make everything feel so perfect and unique. So a little extra attention to detail when making these does make this a much more special pattern. So single crochet into each stitch around. When you get to the end, just join with a slip stitch to the first single crochet you made. Then you can fasten off, and we're going to flip our fan stitch mitts upside down, and we're going to do the bottom. I finished row 11, all that single crochet. I joined with a slip stitch to the first single crochet I made in that row. Now I'm just going to snip my yarn. I don't need very much tail. Oops, there we go. And I'm going to pull it back through that loop to fasten off. And I'm going to weave it in with my, my yarn needle in a moment. First I'm going to flip my work over so that I'm looking at the foundation chain row. And we're going to put a single crochet row across the bottom. Like I said, this is a good way to finish off your pair of mitts. It gives it strength and durability and a nice clean edge. So we're going to start with a slip knot. Make sure it's not too tight or too loose. We're going to join with a single crochet into the bottom row. So anywhere you like. I think I'll just put it a couple of stitches before my initial start. So I put my hook in on one of these chains. Now this is going to feel a bit floppy and loose, so don't be alarmed because it is a little strange. There's my chain. And actually, let me make sure I'm looking at this properly. Yep, there's the chain. I'm going to join with a single crochet. So the loop on my hook counts. There's my first single crochet, and it's going to look like this. You're going to be like, oh, that doesn't look like it's going to be very solid. But don't worry, after you put in the rest of the single crochets, it will look much stronger. So where is that little, there it is, there's my little tail. So I'm going to work over top of all my little tails here, so I can weave them in as I go. Now you don't have to, you can weave them all in afterwards if you find that easier. But you're going to carefully work your way around the bottom of your glove and pick up each chain and work a single crochet into it. So if you started with 24 chains, you should have 24 single crochets. If you started with 32, you should have 32 single crochets. Just carefully work each chain all the way around. Take your time, there's no rush. You want to make sure this looks nice and even. And it will maintain that lovely little lacy bit. You see how this is filling in and it doesn't look like it's pulling anything out of alignment. There's the next one. Foundation chain rows always look a little funny underneath. So this is a good habit to get into if you're making something like a hat or a pair of gloves and you've got a foundation chain row that starts with that big circle we made. It's always nice to go back and add a finishing row because it gives it strength and a nice neat finish. So you can go ahead and finish single crocheting around your foundation chain row. When you get to the end, slip stitch to the first single crochet and we'll fasten off and weave in all of our tails. Here I am back round to the beginning. There's my first single crochet. It's what I joined my yarn with. I'm going to slip my hook right through the whole stitch and slip stitch to join. There we go. Snip my yarn. Again, don't need too much tail. Just enough to make sure a nice knot is created. There we go. And now you take your yarn needle, thread up that little tail, and you're going to take your needle, go through, so through to the inside of your glove. And what I like to do is just pick up all of the insides of those little single crochets I just made. You see there's some of my little tails sticking out. You can trim those later. Pick up a few, pull it through. Give it a nice tug because you don't want to tighten your openings on you. Maybe just make it a little tighter. Yeah, that's nice. And then I'm going to skip over that stitch and I'm just going to pick up some of the same stitches I just did and pull the rest of the tail back in it, and that'll kind of lock it into place. And if there's any little tiny bits and pieces left sticking out, like this little one here, you can trim them up. Then flip it over, do the other one, and you're all done. And there you have it. One lovely pair of completely reversible, easy fan stitch fingerless gloves. So if you've made one, go ahead and make the other one exactly the same way. And it doesn't matter what hand they wind up on. There's no right and no left. And that is how you make a lovely pair of fingerless gloves, perfect for date night or even a bridal party. And remember, you can get a copy of the free pattern over on our website if you haven't gotten it already. If you liked these lacy fan stitch gloves, I have another nifty fingerless glove pattern exclusively available over in our Etsy shop. If you want to head over to our Etsy shop and peruse some of the patterns we have for sale there, I'll put the link in the description box down below. And thank you so much to all of you who regularly pop in and purchase something from us. It helps keep us going here at the Jayda InStitches show. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with all your friends on the social medias. I love it when you guys post me pictures and leave me comments, so you can keep doing that too. Thank you so much. We will see you again really, really soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Stay crafty, stay warm, and make yourself something fancy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date to prepare for. Good night!